Hey, expect the kids up in Austin at the governor's office to be listening in right now. We are streaming live at KURV.com. That service powered by South Texas Buick GMC, McAllen Mission, and Texas Mutual Insurance Company. A workers' comp provider, Work Safe Texas. The legislative session come and gone. So let's get a grade. Governor Greg Abbott joining us on 710 KURV. Welcome back to the show. $800 million for border security, Governor. What do we get?
We get the most secure system of protecting the people in the state of Texas that we've ever had before. Specifically, what we are going to get, we are going to add hundreds of Texas Department of Public Safety officers. By doing that, it will allow us to remove the National Guard who are on the border because they will be replaced by the DPS officers. It will allow those DPS officers who are working overtime and have been displaced from their communities from across the entire state of Texas to return home and do their jobs in their hometowns. The money will also provide technology and other assets.
Yeah.
It will provide cameras. It will provide airplanes. It will provide boats. The bottom line is it will give us the tools and resources we need to go after the real problem. And the real problem that everyone needs to recognize is that the cartels are making money off of everything that is crossing the border in any type of illegal fashion. Such as, let me make this key point, and I'll let you ask your question. And that is, remember what happened so profoundly last year when you had these women and children who were coming across the border. They didn't just magically and on their own show up across the border. They were paying money to cartels to bring them across the border, and the women were often having to pay with their bodies and their lives, victims of human trafficking. And so our job is to shut down the lifeblood of these cartels by making them pay such a heavy price, by losing money, by doing business in the state of Texas, that they take their business elsewhere.
Governor, is it set in stone how the money will be spent? And I ask you this because we talked about this about 6 months ago, last time you were on the show. We have successfully secured the border in key points. For example, Border Patrol, they did this Operation Rio Grande years ago, and they secured the community of Brownsville. They gave us an example of how you put enough people on the ground and boats in the water, then you're able to secure a specific site. So my argument back then was, hey, Governor, how about we put dozens and dozens and dozens of boats in the Rio Grande and prevent anyone from crossing over? Is it set in stone how we spend the money, or can we still buy those boats and put them in the water?
We can buy the boats and put them in the water. That's part of what the funding provides. And the way you just described it actually is close to the way that we are going to go about doing it. Remember a couple of key facts here, and that is that even though this year we have not seen the surge that we saw last year, we are still seeing about 10,000 people come across the border per month without authorization. So the problem still exists. But to break it down quite narrowly, you talked about adding resources to a particular sector, which is the primary thing that we did when we increased the National Guard on the border. What we found is that when we added money to a certain sector, it caused the cartels to move their activity to a different sector, where it increased cross-border traffic at that sector. So what we need to do is to be much more comprehensive in our approach and have these surge operations operate continuously, which was the other thing that you kind of suggested, and that is there have been sporadic or periodic surges on the border, and whenever those have taken place, we've seen the cross-border activity decrease. What we want to achieve is a lasting and ongoing border surge, not just in one or two sectors, but in all sectors, to ensure that, for one, we were able to decrease the unauthorized cross-border traffic. And here is the other main thing, Sergio, and that is that by doing so, we're going to be able to increase the legitimate cross-border traffic.
Joining us on 710 KURV for this post-legislative session conversation, Governor Greg Abbott.
Yeah, Governor Tim Sullivan here. It's going to take some time to ramp up the DPS border surge. How long do you think the National Guard will be in place until all the DPS troopers you want down here are down here?
Sure. Well, let me explain the way the troopers will be assigned to go down there, and that will answer the question. They are going to begin their first class here shortly, in a few weeks, I think, where they will get trained, and it's an expedited class because these members of this class will be comprised primarily of people who have prior law enforcement experience or prior military experience, and they will be able to be trained in a shorter period of time, get them down there. And as we add these newly trained Department of Public Safety officers to the border region, that will at that time allow us to begin to peel back and reduce the number of National Guard members. We have several of these Department of Public Safety classes lined up one after another to make sure that we get the adequate training. We cannot skimp or shorten the amount of what they learn and what they do and the way they train. We have to be precise and effective in the way that these Border Patrol members are educated. But we have class after class after class lined up. And as those newly trained, newly minted Department of Public Safety officers graduate and are deployed down to the border, that is when we will be able to begin to remove the National Guard. And remember this, because this is so important for people to understand, and that is the Department of Public Safety officers are going to be far more effective than the National Guard for two reasons. One is
that's the argument that we've been making for quite some time.
Yeah, they're going to have the training and the legal ability to make arrests, to use guns, to do whatever needs to be done by a typical law enforcement officer. The National Guard does not have the authority to make arrests. Point two is that Department of Public Safety officers do not cost as much as National Guard members. And then you could add a point three in there, and that is these National Guard members are displaced from their own homes, their own jobs, or other activities. They will be allowed to go home. So this is going to be a win-win. It's going to be a budgetary win. It's going to be a law enforcement win, and it will be a win for the families of the state.
Governor, before we let you go, some local lawmakers lined up some legislation to lower the potential tax rate of any future taxing entity. Hospital districts, Cameron County, Hidalgo County, 75 cents down to 25 cents, and they want to bring that to voters possibly, near future, November, maybe next year, asking for a vote to create a taxing district, hospital taxing district in Cameron and Hidalgo County. That's something you might see here pretty soon. Do you support that legislation?
Well, here's the deal about it, and that is this is what we call a local piece of legislation. As you pointed out, it affects the Rio Grande Valley. One thing we know about the Rio Grande Valley, and that is it does have some challenges with regard to access to health care. And this is a way of providing greater access to health care, but I think it does so in the right approach. And that is, you mentioned how it's going to call for a vote, and it's going to be the people of the Rio Grande Valley who get to decide whether or not that is going to take place. And it will cause an increase in the tax burden for the people of the Rio Grande Valley. And that's something that they have the right to make the decision on. And that's the way democracy works. And so I think it is the right approach to allow the people of the RGV to decide whether or not they want to spend money to create this hospital district.
Some fiscal conservatives would say that you've got the power to put the kibosh on this plan already in an area that's already poor and should not be taxed anymore. What would you say to them?
Well, as opposed to me vetoing it, I think that I should allow the citizens of the Rio Grande Valley to veto it if that's what they want to do, or to support it if that's what they want to do.
Governor, Tim Sullivan back here again and again before we let you go. How are you liking your Secretary of State so far?
Well, he is fabulous. We're talking about Carlos Cascos, who was the county judge of Cameron County. And just as a person, he's such a genuine, kind, fun, thoughtful, effective individual. And having run a county such as Cameron County, he knows how government works. He's been around. He's smart. But also he's doing something very helpful that sometimes you may know about this and talk about it. Many times you may not. He's been traveling across the state of Texas.
And across the border, too, right?
And I was going to get to that. And across the border. He's made trips to Mexico I don't want to announce anything yet. You will hear announcements coming up this summer, but I will tell you this, and that is Texas is really building bridges with our neighbor in Mexico, and we are strengthening that relationship, which is very important from both a geographic as well as an economic standpoint. And so he is doing a fantastic job for us with regard to the border region, but also with regard to economic development across the state of Texas. And importantly, you mentioned the border region. He's doing a good job there, of course, in the Rio Grande Valley.
You want to endorse anybody for president, Governor?
In El Paso. For president, You know what? I'm not going to pick any particular person.
No dog in the fight right now?
Yeah. I will tell you this. I'm looking for someone who's going to return this country to our constitutional foundations, someone who's going to get government out of our lives as opposed to running our lives, and someone who's going to restore the freedoms and liberties upon which this country was founded.
Governor, thank you for your time. Governor Greg Abbott joining us on 710 KURV.